Welcome back to the Anime Field Guide. Once again, we are reviewing Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, the 2007 original Super Robot television series produced by Studio Gainax and directed by Hiroyuki Imaishi. Once again, I'd like to offer a general spoiler warning. Gurren Lagann is a pretty heavy narrative series, and there are a couple of character moments where it makes discussing the story a bit difficult with some notable character sacrifices. So if you have not yet seen Gurren Lagann, this is your general warning. If you want to check it out before listening to the episode in full, then you can check it out on Crunchyroll. It's got the Japanese only with subtitles, but you also have to deal with the Aniplex logo placed on the bottom right. There's, I think it's also more like the standard edition, so the digital lines are kind of more noticeable on your more high-definition TVs. So probably Hulu and or Netflix would be the better option, I would say. From my experience, they got the both languages, and they also seem to have the better image quality, and there's no Aniplex logo. So it's highly recommended that you check out Gurren Lagann before listening to this episode, or of course you can continue listening if you don't mind spoilers. As far as home video releases, Gurren Lagann is available, but this is an Aniplex show, hence that logo in Crunchyroll. And so it's under Sony's management, and the most recent set is priced accordingly at Aniplex prices, hovering around $200, or it'll go, quote, on sale for $150. Of course, that's the full series plus the movies. What a bargain. Even if you were going after the older DVD sets, maybe from like Bandai Entertainment, you still gotta deal with eBay and others, and the prices will range all over the place. So you're still shelling out more for a used product. Of course, if you're in the UK, you've got the Anime Limited option at least. So that's good news. But of course, if you are like me, living in the United States, you kind of need to shell out for then they will not play on a North American Blu-ray player. So you then have to shell out for a region-free player. So at this current time, unfortunately, despite being almost 20 years old, there's not really a standard release or a recent standard release of Gurren Lagann. So streaming is kind of your only option. Gurren Lagann is set in a distant future where Earth is under the rule of Lord Genome, the Spiral King, who forces humanity to eke out a miserable existence in underground villages, which is enforced through his army of beastmen piloting giant robots, although it's so much time has passed since then that most of humanity has forgotten about the surface entirely. So one day, a boy named Simon discovers a mysterious drill-shaped artifact on one of his digs as he's expanding his village's borders. Another youth, the brash and boastful Kamina, insists that there is a surface world, and that Simon's drill is the key to piercing the heavens. Shortly thereafter, Simon discovers a small mech with a head for a body that activates when the drill is inserted into a center console, and at that moment another giant-faced mech robot, a gunman, crashes through the village ceiling as it is battling a rifle-wielding girl, Yoko Littner. But Simon's little mech is able to draw upon a surprising amount of power, and in the course of their battle, Simon, Kamina, and Yoko burst into the surface world, where they are then surrounded by the beastmen and giant robots who are preying upon humanity. Kamina names this little mech Lagann, and the trio quickly gather human allies on the surface world. Kamina steals a gunman for himself and names it Gurren, and the combined powers of Kamina and Simon result in the super fighting robot Gurren Lagann. And so begins Simon's journey to manhood as he pilots Gurren Lagann in order to free humanity from oppression of the Spiral King and unlock further secrets that will take humanity's struggle to the stars and beyond. So, to kind of set the scene for how this show is going to go, the story of Gurren Lagann has its beginnings, of course, with 1995's Neon Genesis Evangelion, as several members of the staff either worked on Evangelion in its various capacities or got their start like Imaishi did. Those proceeds were beginning to dry up, so Gainax's management was more leveraging the property into pachinko machines, and also they opened the Evangelion store in 2005. That moved more into an online space, and that's since been under new management multiple times. Plus the various financial scandals of the late 90s and continued mismanagement at the company leadership. Around this time, Hideaki Anno finally had enough, and he'd left Gainax in 2006 and took a large chunk of the creative staff with him as he went to form Studio Kara and began to work on the new theatrical versions of Evangelion. So during all of this, you also have 2000's Furikuri, which was more of like a cult classic, but still very well regarded. The fourth wall shattering OVA series, that was a co-production with Production IG, and that was created and directed by Kazuya Tsuramaki, who'd also directed 2004's Gunbuster 2, which was Gainax's 20-year anniversary, and that got a compilation movie in 2006. And so, like, really around the 2000s, in the midst of all this, Gainax was entering more into production committee and co-production works. You got with Studio Shaft with Maho Romantic, This Ugly Yet Beautiful World, He Is My Master. You've got JC Staff with Melody of Oblivion, and Studio AIC with Petite Princess Yushi, with Madhouse, Magical Shopping Arcade, Abenobashi. So all of these series and others are kind of what the staff at Gainax, or specifically the staff at Gurren Lagann, were working on. And so after Anno's departure, those who remained at Gainax decided to band together to undertake this project. It would be a new original anime, it would be a morale booster, and it would pave the way for a new set of original anime to prove to the world that Studio Gainax could still push the creative envelope and move beyond Evangelion. And of course, this project would become known as Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. And of course, however, as we now know, with almost 20 years of hindsight at this point, Gurren Lagann marks more than just the beginning of a new era at Studio Gainax, as this particular group would also leave Gainax not even 5 years later to form Studio Trigger. And so if you want a more complete story of Gainax, including this time, we have a Studio Rundown episode for Gainax, and Studio Trigger is currently in the pipeline as we get the Studio Rundown back underway. So hang on for just we'll hang on for just a little while longer, and we'll have a Studio Rundown for Trigger. So let's jump into the staff breakdown for Gurren Lagann, starting of course with series director Hideaki Imaishi. After graduating university, Imaishi joined Gainax in 1994, started as an animator and storyboard artist on Neon Genesis Evangelion and its subsequent movies under Hideaki Anno. He also worked on the romance comedy His and Hers Circumstances, also under Anno, and he eventually moved up to animation director on certain episodes of Furikuri. He was also episode director for episode 3 of Magical Shopping Arcade Abenobashi, that's from 2002 with Madhouse. It's another surreal anime with wild setting changes between episodes, so the one he worked on is very much sci-fi comedy plus mecha. And he continued working on Madhouse properties. He was on animation and storyboard on Trava Fist Planet, which is a prequel OVA to what would become 2009's Redline film. Both of those were directed under Takeshi Koike, and it spins very nicely into Hideaki Imaishi's directorial debut, 2004's Dead Leaves. So this was actually animated at Production IG. Dead Leaves was originally created by comic artist Imai who's also on staff for Gurren Lagann as the 3D mechanical designer. But Dead Leaves is this, it's a ridiculous film. It's an hour long, it's heavily stylized, it's like this tour de force of just cartoonish sex and violence. There's not really much of a plot other than we get into this fight and that sets up for the next fight, which sets up for the next fight, and then the movie's over. Dead Leaves, his directorial debut, is a fascinating piece of work. I think it's more interesting to see is like some early DNA of Gurren Lagann and others. But on Gurren Lagann, Imaishi was assisted with his assistant director, Masahiko Otsuka. Now, Otsuka got his start under Isao Takahata at Studio Ghibli. He was assistant directing on the films Pom Poko and Whisper of the Heart before transferring to Gainax in 1995, where he also worked on Neon Genesis Evangelion as an assistant episode director, also on His and Hers and Circumstances, Furikuri, Abenobashi. His directorial debut is also in 2002 with Petite Princess Yushi, which again, that was by Studio EIC. And it's a 2002 fantasy romance television anime. We also have Imaishi on storyboards for that. He was the episode director. Otsuka-san was the episode director for Gunbuster 2, the OVAs, and its movies, which was the last project he worked on before moving to Gurren Lagann. Now, for the series composition, the chief writer, it's actually kind of an anime newcomer. This person's better known as a theatrical scriptwriter at the time. This is Kazuki Nakashima. And they are a former editor at Futabasha Publishing Company, specifically for the magazines Lupin III Official Magazine and Weekly Manga Action. And more specifically, Nakashima-san was Ken Ishikawa's editor on Getter Robo, which was illustrated by Go Nagai, and he remains an outspoken fan of Ishikawa's work and also gave an address at Ishikawa's funeral. But Nakashima is more known as a screenwriter, a playwright, a novelist. In fact, his first screening anime credits, were with Re Cutie Honey in 2004 and then Gurren Lagann in 2007. He'd also been heavily involved with Crayon Shinchan, as he's also friends with this author, Yoshito Usui. and he's acted as a chief producer on some Crayon Shin-chan animation projects, and later involvement with anime includes more trigger works, Kill la Kill, Promare, and Brand New Animal. Nakashima was joined by Gainax veterans Shoji Saiki, who also wrote Maho Romantic and He Is My Master, as well as Hiroshi Yamaguchi, who is on Gaogaigar, a series composition. On character designers, we have Atsushi Nishigori, and he was an animator on Furikuri and Maho Romantic and Petite Princess Yushi, so you're starting to see everybody's working on the same things. And he's the episode director on Gunbuster 2 OVAs, and he was also the movie led to his next promotion as the character designer on Gurren Lagann. Now, as far as his character designs, as he was working on Furikuri, you can definitely tell, especially as I'm watching Furikuri right now, that the visual language of Furikuri is very clear. So, by extension, his designs are very reflective of Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, who is, again, another veteran character designer and just designer since the Daikon days of Gainax. So Gurren Lagann has like these very bold lines and cartoonish, very angular. You got the frequent distortions of squash, stretch, and bounce. Lots of bounce. And it just feeds into the wild energy of what Gurren Lagann is. Like very brash, in your face, high energy. And it's a series that you can see. In fact, when I was first watching Gurren Lagann, I was surprised it wasn't Yoshiyuki Sadamoto on character designs. They're that close. Very much a clear influence. But on mechanical designs, we have Yo Yoshinari, who has been with Gainax for a long time. In fact, he actually applied to Gainax and Madhouse after graduating from vocational school, but he actually started out as Madhouse for a brief time on Tokyo Babylon, because at the time Gainax fumbled his application. So once his application to Gainax went through the process a couple of months later, and he joined Gainax shortly after the production wrapped on Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. His first assignment was actually a film, Uru in Blue, but that's one of several projects that Gainax was canceling around the late 90s. And so he floated around on other projects for Key Animation with Metal Fighter Miku at JC Staff. He's got some uncredited Sailor Moon episodes. He also was an animator on Mobile Suit Victory Gundam and others, but his big break as a key animator plus mechanical animation director was, of course, on Neon Genesis Evangelion and its films, and then he went over to Production IG with Jinro, the Wolf Brigade, and then he was in charge of the setting plus visual designs at Furikuri. His mech designer debut role comes from 2004's Melody of Oblivion plus creature designs on This Ugly Yet Beautiful World, which really leads into this delightful fusion and just weirdness of Gurren Lagann's premier mecha, I guess I should say, like the Gunman. Of course, it's about a couple words separated from Gundam. But aside from, obviously, Daddy Gundam, we've got some classic mecha, such as 1976 Dino Mech Gaiking, which have the faced mecha, of course, Brave Gao Gaigar, and basically the entire Brave series, like X-Kaiser, etc. You've got Go Lion or Voltron, and you can also think of like the Zords from Super Sentai or Power Rangers. Most of these gunmen are themed around animals, because the whole idea is that the humanity is being forced underground, and you've got this guy who's called the Beast King or the Spiral King, and Beastmen, these animal-human hybrids, are taking over the surface of the earth, and so they're beastmen and operating gunmen that are just walking animal faces with arms and legs, like these weird torso things going on. And so that's where most of the gunmen are themed around animals. Also, like in a more comedic twist, the gunmen being these walking faces, when the pilot talk, the mecha is the mouths are moving. And it kind of leans into this sort of like absurdist comedy, as in these faced gunmen can then also combine together to form more powerful robots. And so the whole thing is the more faces a mecha has, the more stronger it is, the more powerful it is. And of course, being with by the guys who worked on Furikuri, this is taken, of course, to its logical and illogical extreme as Gurren Lagann continues. Yoshinari-san's designs also play around with the absurd. So specifically, we have like the sunglasses on the Gurren's chest emblem. You know, the flying ship Dai Gurren, when they finally eject the bridge in the final battle, and they're all floating away. It has like a skeleton for a lower torso. I specifically remember there's one of the generals, the Beastmen generals, Adiane. Her gunman is like boobs and nipples for eyes, and then she's got this V-shaped mouth. So when she's talking, like it's like the boobs are staring at you, and then the robot's crotch is talking to you. And of course, she's walking around on like sexy heels. So I see a little bit of design influence. Like there's so many robots like that in like Shinkon Gatai Godanar. That is just like the delightfully absurd. But I also like the little moments where pilots are talking and then their windows will like take over the screen, or when a mecha is shouting, like again, the mecha will suddenly grow to large proportions and shouting, like spraying everybody else with spittle, and how it just plays into the whole comedy of the show. Nobody in the show has inside voices. But during the Japanese broadcast, Gurren Lagann also ran into censorship trouble, most notably with the bathhouse episode of episode 6. Again, one other thing that defines Gurren Lagann is its rather heavy-handed fan service. You got characters, Gainax is no stranger to, as a studio, is no stranger to fan servicey moments and having very bouncy characters. The literal Gainax bounce was called Gainaxing. So, of course, you have to have that call out in this show. Of course, one character is barely wearing anything for most of the series with Yoko. And so she's kind of the poster girl for Gurren Lagann. Hey boys, check this lady out. And she's got a big gun. And is regularly just sticking her butt into the camera and just all other assorted things just jiggling around on screen. And with the literal booby elevator in episode 6, where it's the whole thing with that is obviously they find a bathhouse and the boys are trying to sneak into the girls' bathhouse, or really Kamen is trying to sneak into the girls' bathhouse. But the whole time, like, it's staffed entirely by bunny girls, like Playboy bunny girls, which is, again, it's a Daikon 4 reference, but it's also like every girl that's ever been in a Gainax show is represented in this bunny bathhouse. It's such a weird episode. And again, it's just another one that's just kind of just out of left field. Other aspects of the show is, of course, all of the innuendo. Very much, they are sneaking in just as many penis metaphors as they can. The drills, the rocks, the shape of even like the base is this one, it's this big walking face and just a large gun deck just protruding out. Unfortunately, there's another character called like Liron, who's like an unfortunate, and very outdated, even in the 2000s, very unfortunate and outdated gay stereotypes. Anytime there's a dick reference in the show, you'll just see him blush. And he's not a predatory at all, but that's just the joke. The predatory gay man joke is all over the place in Gurren Lagann. And it's one of those things that when I'm looking back and when I was watching it, it's like, yeah, that really hasn't aged well. And but that's like the biggest sticking point I have with the series. It's unfortunate because if not for this character, then the Team Daiguren would be dead 10 times over. The more conventional humanoid mecha is more like in the second half of the series after humanity's victory over the Beastmen, and we're now populating the Earth, and so the humanity briefly discards like these beast gunmen for mass-produced models based off of the Gurren Lagann robot. These are called like the Grapparls, where you get more of your Mobile Suit Gundam influences, designs, your obviously your Evangelion designs. Also, I see, and just more like the aliens in the back half, kind of like some nods to Ultraman or like Ultra 7. And but like the title robot itself, Gurren Lagann, it's a bundle of design references. There's obviously more than one Gurren Lagann. As far as the primary motifs, you can of course see like if Evangelion and some of the mechs from Furikuri and the like color scheme of Getter Robo. In fact, there's a lot of Getter Robo influence with this and like the central power system of these robots, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's just this lovely fusion of all of this weird stuff. But I'd say like Gurren Lagann, at least the title robot, takes its design influences a little bit more from the Gundam side than the Evangelion side. And of course, like with the self-referential sides, back to Furikuri, we've got our title girl, Yoko. She gets a flying scooter after the time skip that's like almost 1-to-1 to Haruno's Vespa. Then you've got some of the bigger robots. The Arc Gurren Lagann reminds me very strongly of the Gunbuster if it had like this weird offshoot baby with the Getter Robo. Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, of course, that's the logical extreme of all the faced mecha. It's basically just a massive skeleton of faces, and then the whole thing's just on fire. And each member of the team, pilots a limb and or manifests a weapon and defense systems from nothing, basically. They're all just generating this on the fly in the final battle. And there's a super form beyond that goes even further beyond. But that's specifically to the second movie, so that I'm trying to keep it more to the TV series. But the whole motif, really, for Gurren Lagann, this is a very interesting power set, not something you see very often. I mean, you've got mecha that are wielding a giant sunglass as a sword, for Pete's sake. But Gurren Lagann's power set is designed around the concept of drills. And so the series director, back in when Imaishi was planning and coming up with ideas for Gurren Lagann, he wanted a unique power set. And he thought drills would be an interesting way to, not just because it'd be a weird power, it'd be a nice motif for continual progress. We're going to make a show and it's going to continuously up the ante, and we're going to go through the stakes and everything's going to get more and more ridiculous, but we need consistent forward progress. And so series composition, Kazuki Nakashima, he expanded that concept into the script. Is like, okay, drills, what do? They spin and they always move forward. And so what is the moving forward? Now we go into life and growth, and DNA as a spiral. Life finds a way to progress, always moving forward. Evolution, spiral power. We've got a mecha themed around drills, but it all leads into this power set called spiral power. And there's not really any logic, or at least conventional logic, when it comes to spiral power. Some of the more technical-minded characters, and something that I always enjoy in this series, is there are very smart characters in this show, but like most of humanity has been underground and suppressed. So like there's nothing like a general education for any of these folks. So a lot of these guys are more like just very, very like cavemen, essentially. Now, all of a sudden, cavemen are piloting giant robots and they're having to figure out all this technology. And there is like a somewhat of a scientific explanation, or at least in universe science explanation of spiral power. But anytime someone tries to explain spiral power through science, every single pilot literally falls asleep seconds into the meeting. It's one of my favorite gags. And it's such a wonderful, just clever self-insert audience joke of like, nobody cares how spiral power works. It's just spiral power equals fighting spirit. That's all they need to know. And as long as you have enough fighting spirit and enough passion and energy, you can pretty much accomplish whatever you want, especially where our title character Simon is concerned when piloting his little mech Lagann. Because essentially what makes Gurren Lagann, his big bros robot Gurren, which is basically a traditional faced mecha painted red, and then the Lagann slams a drill into the top of Gurren, and all of a sudden it hijacks those systems. And so the combination is Gurren Lagann, and the robot is significantly powered up, and so it takes on a more humanoid, traditional like Gundam form. And this little mech can do much more than that. It can take over pretty much anything that it jams its little drill into, and to override the systems. So when you take that kind of logic and you apply that to even bigger and bigger machines, and so you get to the point to where, like, as long as Simon believes hard enough, and he is typically in the pilot seat of Gurren Lagann, his powers are amplified even further, allowing him to essentially override anything that stands in his way. This applies to whether he's drilling through earth, rock, water, outer space, alternate realities, or even the drilling through the concept of nothingness itself. As long as Simon believes he can do it, it pretty much does it. And especially, like, nothing's even more ridiculous as, like, the finishing move, like the Giga Drill break. It's just pure cartoon fun. Gurren Lagann magically produces this massive drill that's like 10 times its size, transforms itself into a rocket, and essentially just punches through whatever's standing in the way. Obviously, this is all capped off with like a cool pose and massive explosions. Gurren Lagann and explosions go together real nicely. This is a really fun, crunchy show. And really, like, it's just the cartoon fun of seeing these little action figures smashed together and just manly spirit punching through everything. It's a simple concept on its face that they really do a lot of clever and unexpected things with. But some of the enemies in the back half, especially for like the alien side of things, as the anti-spirals, are comprised of these geometric patterns and then columns that then explode into cubes. And it really just accentuates the alien nature, and just, it's really like when you think of like the anti-spirals and the chief alien threat, it's kind of like it's really where I see more of the Ultraman influence, where you get more like aliens as a concept, or just really just nth dimensional chicanery going on. If you're a fan of Doctor Who, things like the Daleks and other alien races that kind of exist beyond reality, that's kind of what the threat becomes, because we've accelerated the threat so much that now we're just dealing with alternate realities and dimensions now. These episodes 17 through the end, as the scale of the conflict gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it becomes a lot to animate. So things begin to be animated in 3D CGI. So behind the 3D mech designs is Imai Toons, but I do love the grand reveal of the anti-spiral homeworld. Once we're finally confronting the enemy face to face, they are also humanoids. In fact, basically 1-to-1 to the humanoids of Earth. And it's a kind of thing of like, we had this spiral energy as well, But the whole idea, or at least what they call the spiral menace, is because this spiral power accelerates evolution to such an insane degree and to do like things so fast, it will get to a point where eventually it will consume the universe because it's constantly expanding and compounding on itself. And that's their whole deal, is they go, well, we reject that. We are going to protect the universe by killing every and all life that is based around this spiral energy. And apparently that's their grand idea of being the arbiters of peace and unity in the galaxy. So it is a deliciously tragic reveal when you get to see like, oh, these guys were basically humans at one point, but then they discarded everything to reject that. And not only that, they're oppressing the entire universe to conform to a standard because of fear of this spiral menace. As they start off with these weird geometric patterns and like these more conceptual designs, all of a sudden these are human faces and hands and feet. Like all of the mecha are like literally hands and feet with laser beams. And it's such a weird thing that also sees like all their home, what am I trying to say? All of their warships are suddenly these giant floating faces. In fact, a collection of faces. It really kind of goes into Eldritch territory, really. It's just such an uncanny and creepy enemy. And they start doing things like compressing space into an ocean where they attempt to drown the entire team of Gurren Lagann. And there's this depressing black hole basically at the center of it that they've used to kill so many other spiral warriors before. It's just, they're humanoid, they're faced warships actually remind me of like a lot of the flying angel fortresses from Razafon. That's like 2002 with Studio Bones. And a lot of those mecha as well were just straight up human like statues, which kind of leads into like all of the different references piled into Gurren Lagann. Obviously, this is an anime created by mecha geeks for mecha geeks, and they also have some classic anime callouts. You know, right off the bat in episode 1, the opening scene of Gurren Lagann is an homage to the opening of Captain Harlock, SSX. Also, the noble sacrifices and the dramatic character moments and their death scenes, you know, featuring monotone colors and these dark pencil lines. The fans of, well, the staff and Imaishi in particular have gone with a particular influence to Ashita no Joe, you know, Tomorrow's Joe. And of course, obviously, as I said at the top, you know, Brave King Gao Gaigar, Voltron, Getter Robo, again, especially Getter Robo, with the whole concept of spiral power basically being the same thing as the fighting spirit energy of Getter Robo. It's one of those, like, you don't need to know all of the influences to enjoy this show, but the more that I see and the more that I also experience the Gainax catalog, the more I get to see just how much they were really pulling from. And that's especially where I see like the Furikuri influence. And I also really appreciate the music. Now, the composer here is Taka Iwasaki. So from Rurouni Kenshin, Read or Die, Get Backers, Black Cat, Witch Hunter Robin, Yakitate Japan. These are all things that were more like contemporary going into Gurren Lagann. And he's since gone on to do Soul Eater, Black Butler, Gatchaman Crowds, the Mononoke movies, Noragami, Bungo Stray Dogs, See the Money of Soul and Possibility Control, Jormungand, Irregular at Magic High School. Like, he's really, I think Taka Iwasaki, I know like Yoko Kanno and Hiroyuki Sawano are like some of like the big names out here, but I really think folks are sleeping on Taka Iwasaki. His catalog is really impressive, and he's known for like these high energy, funky, jazzy tunes, and with a mix of orchestra, which all feed into Gurren Lagann. It's primarily orchestra plus rock and a little bit of jazz, and he knows exactly when to go. Most of it is actually really triumphant. Like, it's an excellent soundtrack to listen to, and but he also knows exactly when to bring that energy down to do like the more somber moments, which is something that Gurren Lagann, it's an extreme of highs and lows. You'll have these grand triumphant moments, but then there's always that rug pull waiting to happen, that moment of despair, like that big defeat or a noble character sacrifice at the height of victory. That's Gurren Lagann is constantly pulling off the same trick, and it works every single time because it's all part of the narrative structure that is being steadily built. It's the escalation, continued escalation. So it's all feeds into itself. And of course, if you're thinking like the Gurren Lagann soundtrack, I wanted to mention Taka Iwasaki first, because the first thing I always think of when it's the Gurren Lagann soundtrack is, of course, Row, Row, Fight the Power, you know, The Rap is a Man's Soul by the guy Tarantula. or Libera Me from Hell, which is combining the lyrics from Rap is a Man's Soul with Libera Me, the responsory sung in the Catholic Church's Office of the Dead. And it's the absolution of the dead. It's like the service of prayers at the coffin before the burial. It's asking God to have mercy on the deceased at the last judgment. So you have this with like row, row, fight the power. And it's such a weird fusion, but it just works. And then more of like on the Soul Eater side, I can hear so many influences and just early beats of Soul Eater and Noragami and others, especially when the anti-spirals take over, because that's when he starts mixing in more of the mixed media and the synthesizer and the much more technical techno aspects of the soundtrack. And you combine this with Yuri Katsuhara, who is the opera singer. So she's the opera singer from the Libera Me from Hell. And she's done more like theater, commercial work, but she is also a regular collaborator with Iwasaki-san. So she was, there are other opera or operatic moments in the Soul Eater and Black Butler and the Gatchaman soundtracks. And you may also recognize her with working on Yuki Kajira soundtracks with Noir and Dot Heck, and particularly Madoka Magica. And so the soundtrack of Gurren Lagann is super unique. I love it a lot. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. And another part is, of course, the credit themes. You've got Sorairo Days, which is the full opening song for the entire series, but they'll change up the lyrics. Well, not change up the lyrics. They'll go like further into the song the further along the series goes. So there's like 3 primary incarnations of Sorairo Days. And this is sung by Shoko Nakagawa. And I do think it's cool how we go like in the back half of the song for part 2. It's like same but different. But there's also a ending credits song for specifically episode 16, which is called Happily Ever After. And episode 16 is it's not the exact halfway point, but it's the bridge. It's the compilation episode. So she sings a 1 episode exclusive ending credits song, Happily Ever After. The other credit themes are the ending one is Underground, performed by this rock band High Voltage, which had been formed in 2002. This is their only anime music credit, because then they disbanded in 2008. But apparently they're back in 2016, but I don't see anything else by them as far as the anime space. And then the ending credits for episode 17 through the end is Peace for Everyone, sung by another rock band, Afromania, that was around from 2004 to 2009. They have done other anime works, include Sergeant Frog, Kaiba, and Birdie the Mighty Decoded. All of these are really cool bops, but I think obviously the highlight for me is Sorairo Days. That's kind of like the theme song of Gurren Lagann. So you kind of think of Rap as a Man's Soul, Libera Me from Hell, and Sorairo Days are kind of like the 3 main songs that are still associated with Gurren Lagann even now. And I just don't want Taka Iwasaki's like complete body of work to get drowned out in all of that. So if any of those other shows, especially the Mononoke movies, we're about to get the 3rd one on Netflix. And of course, the rapper that he's been collaborating with as well, especially since Soul Eater stuff, is Lotus Juice, so like with Persona 3 and Persona 3 Reload. So he's got a really cool body of work in just anime and the video game space. So definitely check him out. And so getting into the dubbing side and some of the broadcast elements of Gurren Lagann, aside from the censorship trouble in episode 6 and a couple of other things, obviously the American broadcast had to be adjusted a little bit. But the original English dub for Gurren Lagann was supposed to be picked up by AD Vision. So they announced it in 2007, and then they started working on it, but they didn't get very far. It's unsure how many episodes they got through, but there is a test version, the test disc, of the first 5 episodes that they released to very select audiences and reviewers. And that was kind of considered lost media until recently, when it was put up onto the Internet Archive in 2025. The ADV crew included Matt Greenfield on ADR. We had Brett Weaver as Kamina, Josh Grell as Simon, Tiffany Grant as Yoko, Lucy Christian as Nia, Vic Mignogna as Viral. We also had Liam O'Brien and also Chris Patton as Rossiu. But after the ADV side fell through, Bandai Entertainment picked up the license, and the new dub was produced by Bang Zoom Entertainment in 2008, so that's a Tony Oliver on the ADR, using a completely different voice cast as we'll go through. And when Bandai Entertainment collapsed in 2012, Aniplex of America reacquired the North American license in 2013 and kept the Bang Zoom dub. Of course, there's also an alternative English dub produced for Animax Asia's the respective networks. so India, Australia, etc. As far as when it was broadcast in the USA, Gurren Lagann was on the Sci-Fi Channel's Any Monday block in 2008 and later aired on Adult Swim's, or premiered on Adult Swim's Toonami block in August 16th, 2014. It went through to March 2015. So getting down to the actors themselves, I'll start with our trio of Kamina, Simon, and Yoko. Kamina, our title character at the start, is Katsuyuki Konishi. He's known for like Amidamaru from Shaman King, Lakshas from Fairy Tail, Kotaro Amon from Tokyo Ghoul. This is Tengen Uzui from Demon Slayer, and he's got several Pokemon roles, including Rayquaza and Mewtwo. On English side, we got Kyle Herbert from Dragon Ball Z, the narrator, and Gohan. He's also got Aizen from Bleach, and also voices in Naruto, Digimon, Ryu from Street Fighter. In fact, Kyle Herbert's performance as Kamina won him the Best Voice Actor Award in Anime Expo 2009. Simon includes Tetsuya Kakihara, who's Natsu Dragneel, also from Fairy Tail. Garma Zabi from Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin. He's also Prompto in Final Fantasy XV. And Simon is also an early role for Yuri Lowenthal, Insomniac Spider-Man. You've got Yosuke Hanamura from Persona 4 and all of its media. Sasuke from Naruto, Suzaku Kururugi from Code Geass. And then Yoko Littner, who's the person that originally brought Kamina and Simon to the surface. She's voiced by Marina Inoue, who's Armin from Attack on Titan, Child Denji from Chainsaw Man, Momo from My Hero Academia, and Ayesha from the Atelier video game series. And is joined by Michelle Ruff, who's Rukia from Bleach, Yuki Nagano from Haruhi Suzumiya, and Sonashi McLaren from Redline, as well as Chi, our main heroine from Chobits. Rossyu is voiced by Mitsuki Saiga. Now, she's got a lower voice register, so she voices him as a kid and also as an adult. Saiga-san is also Maria Ross from Fullmetal Alchemist and Bella from Made in Abyss, Season 2. Yelena, prominent side character from Attack on Titan, the final season. Joji Nakata also is the voice of Alucard from Hellsing, also gets in as the voice of Rossyu. Again, that's more the post-credits, the 20-year time skip at the end of the series. I just wanted to give him a shout-out. And Rossyu Adai is voiced by Johnny Youngbosch in English. So, again, his contemporary roles around this time would include Lelouch V. Britannia from Code Geass, and, of course, Broly and Sabo from Dragon Ball and One Piece, respectively, as well as he would soon reprise his role as Vash the Stampede when it would come around to the 2010s Badlands Rumble movie. Of course, he's the voice of Vash the Stampede right now in the CGI series. So yeah, Johnny Young Bosch, one of the most recognizable voices. You know him, you love him. Moving on to our next character, Nia Teplin, who's our cloudy-haired princess in a box, and one of the people who is the first to break Simon out of his funk when he's basically in a despair spiral following, the death of Kamina. She's voiced by Yukari Fukui, who's Nono from Gunbuster 2 or Diebuster, as well as Tara Bradford from the Dissidia franchise, representing Final Fantasy VI. She's also Junko Miyagi, who's the school teacher in Furikuri. And in English, Nia Teplin has two English actresses, one for Young and the other one for the time skip, the first time skip. So you got Hendon Walsh, who's Starfire and Blackfire from Teen Titans and DC Superhero Girls, also Princess Bubblegum from Adventure Time. And then the time skip for Act 2, it's Bridget Hoffman. She's also ADR director and script on multiple projects, including Fushigi Yugi. She's got Miyaka Yuki, Rune Venus from El Hazard, and then also she's got Fu, the Wind Knight from Magic Knight's Ray Earth. You've got Viral, the antagonist and rival of Kamina in the first half, and then later co-pilot of Gurren Lagann against the war against the anti-spiral. He joins Simon in the Gurren Lagann. And actually, there's another reference to when in the first half of the series, his gunman robot's got an interesting nickname. And it's called Enkidu. And it's actually named like from this ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, which also plays into Viral's journey from this battle-crazed antagonist rival to then a later friend and comrade of Team Daiguren. Basically, in the epic, Enkidu is created from this clay as a rival and martial equal to King Gilgamesh, but then if they eventually become friends and he joins Gilgamesh on his adventure. And so Viral, it's not just the namesake of his original gunman, but I like that being tied into his character journey as well. He's voiced by Nobuyuki Hiyama, who's Hiei, the fire demon from Yu Yu Hakusho. Again, another similar journey from antagonist to the eventual ally of Yusuke. You've got Murata Azrael from Mobile Suit Gundam Seed, Ikaku Madarame from Bleach, and Gai Shisho from King of Braves Gal Gaigar. Sam Riegel is the English voice actor, which is of Critical Role fame, and he's the voice of Teddy from Persona 4, Taniguchi from Haruhi Suzumiya. He's also another Spider-Man voice, this one from the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 video game. Some additional Team Daiguren voices. We got Kitan Black with Kisho Taniyama, who's John Kirstein for the final season of Attack on Titan, and then Dark Schneider for the most recent adaptation of Bastard Heavy Metal Dark Fantasy. That second one is pretty much him doing his Kitan Black voice, if you've seen that over on Netflix. And he's basically, for a time, he's briefly the leader of Daiguren, and then when Simon takes over as a leader, he basically becomes one of the chief deputies, at least of the battle squadron, because Kitan is this big, brash character who's always itching for a fight. So one of the guys who's like really, really influenced by Kamina's original philosophy of go forward and really smash the enemy to pieces and never stop moving forward, always keep going. In English, he's voiced by Christopher Smith, who's Bright Noah from Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn, as well as his brief appearance in Advent of the Red Comet, so Bright Noah. Very much not doing that voice for Kitan Black, but still very interesting. Liron Littner, chief mechanic for the cast, and he's basically the voice of here's how the technology in this show works. He's voiced by Masaya Onosaka, who is the Japanese voice of Vash the Stampede, at least from the original series, not the CGI anime. In English, this is Steve Blum, again, another dubbed luminary attached to the show. Liron's voice is very different from, Tom's Toonami voice or Spike from Bebop. And then, of course, we got Lord Genome, the Spiral King, who, as we learn later, is a former soldier of freedom who then becomes the jailer of humanity after his defeat at the hands of the Anti-Spiral, and his job is to keep the total population of humanity on the Earth down so they don't all get destroyed by the moon. So he's voiced by Narushi Ikeda, who's more known for like TV and film and stage drama, particularly the Kamen Rider series. Then he was also in the 2003 live-action Sailor Moon. But he's continued as Lord Genome through the films and came through some appearances like Super Robot Wars video games. In English, Lord Genome is voiced by Jameson Price, so Sojiro Sakura from Persona 5, Hercule Satan from Dragon Ball Super, so again, the Bang Zoom dub. And then the Discotheque dub, he is Count Cagliostro in Lupin III, the Castle of Cagliostro. And then the chief antagonist is Anti-Spiral, which again, it's more to say that this guy is like a concept versus a flesh and blood villain like Lord Genome. Also just more straightforwardly evil because, again, he has one directive, destroy all spiral races. And so they're voiced by Takia Kamikawa, who's another stage, film, television actor. He's voiced like Superman from Batman Ninja versus Yakuza League, as well as an episode of Star Wars Visions, The Village Bride. He voices a character named Vaughn. And then Dave Mallow, who's the ADR director of the Harmony Gold dub of Dragon Ball, is the voice of the Anti-Spiral. He's also Commander Amuro from Fulikuri. He's voiced Akuma from Street Fighter, so the mid-2000s to 2010s. That's like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, Street Fighter 4. Also the two OVAs, Street Fighter The Ties That Bind and Street Fighter 4 Alpha Generations. And so, in conclusion, I continue to enjoy Gurren Lagann, both as a love letter to mecha and all the things that we referenced, but also for what it accomplishes on its own. And I think with 20 years of hindsight and what we've seen with Studio Trigger and beyond, and also what Gurren Lagann has also influenced, I think its place in anime history becomes more and more fixed in my mind as this watershed moment for the beginnings of said Studio Trigger and its consistent through line through all of their works, Kill la Kill, Little Witch Academia, Cyberpunk, Promare, Star Wars Visions, even Pantheon Stalking, with even the new Pantheon Stalking it. But of course, you can enjoy it entirely even if you don't know anything that Gurren Lagann is referencing. But for me, I see Gurren Lagann as a series that's like, rise up and rebel against despair. The characters regularly face a wall of impossibility, but instead of turning around and, giving up, they instead smash through and prove that impossible wall is actually more fragile than it seemed. From episode 1, it was always the same conflict, but just consistently scaled up and scaled up. And it's this consistent forward progress that's still just really, that I think is always really cool about Gurren Lagann. These guys are attempting to break a cycle of trauma that has lasted for several generations. Rebel against despair. Reject that status quo of these people who are oppressing you. Manifest your own destiny. Reject the impossible and tear down that wall. Row, fight the power. Again, same message for the village that led to the capital, that led to the stars. It only seems impossible until you take that first step. And what Gurren Lagann teaches us is often that oppression that we see is actually more a facade of strength, only because we've been conditioned to think it was impossible by those who put us there in the first place. And it also tells us that the same cycle of fear and despair is easy to fall into, as it does happen to most of our characters. There are several times where the series will do a whole rug pull. The crew regularly faces setbacks, and these are severe setbacks. But Simon and the Daiguren crew literally, punch the moon back into place and transform it into the new hope and the new forward base of humanity amongst the stars. They take down the Spiral King and establish a new order. But even then, I don't think it is saying that Gurren Lagann is anti-authority of all forms. No, I'd say it's more, again, it's anti-authoritarianism. There are several examples of oppression and what leaders should not do, but then counterbalanced by plenty more examples of positive leadership and positive reinforcement. And this is what we can do when we work together. And all of this is represented through those principles of what's called the spiral power or the spiral principle. That green energy that Simon has wielded since episode 1, and it grows with him. He doesn't do it alone. You can tell from the anime's opening credits and the opening episode. Simon is constantly surrounded by people who help him. And more are added with every single episode. Banding together is the true strength of the people until it becomes a tide of change. But of course, with the whole idea of the anti-spirals and the spiral menace of where if you don't direct this power correctly, or it will get out of control because it will constantly compound on itself, and then it will cause the whole universe to fall into entropy. Well, does that mean that we should just give up on progress entirely? Does that mean we need to stop and reject this idea of evolution and growth as the anti-spirals do? And again, they take it to the extreme, as you would expect in a show like this, of if anything even shows the slightest hint of spiral power, the anti-spirals are there, and they are in force. And I also think even in the brief second act with Rossiu and the world government, it's an important lesson, as, even as it is very much a slow part. And there are indeed awkward messaging throughout. But I think what it's telling us is the second act with that world government and how we've gotten to this point. Now what? It represents that trap of complacency, and also a further trap where they see this was the menace that Lord Genome was, quote, protecting us from, with these space aliens and these overwhelming deals. And the whole thing with the anti-spirals is we are going to give you a chance and then inflict the ultimate despair. We're thinking all these steps ahead. How much pain and how maximum of a pain can we inflict upon you? And that's a lot to come up against. And I think that's what the second act is trying to tell us is an important lesson. Even as, Rossiu's character, I'm not going to call it character assassination, but he certainly takes a lot of L's as he's overthrowing the world government and, of course, attempts to trash the gunmen that Team Daiguren used to win humanity's independence in the first place. Out with the old, in with the new, when it's those exact same gunmen that become humanity's savior against the anti-spiral mechs, as all of these new grapplers, the latest newfangled technology is not cutting it against the true threat that we've been facing the entire time. It's always been the anti-spirals. It's always been that fear and that depression and that despair. It's always been there, but it's just now we're seeing just how big of a form it can take. It's that danger of fear and how it can warp a person into the very thing they fought to overthrow. And so I do appreciate the second arc more because it's an important lesson to Rossiu and his allies, but they do briefly lose sight of the goal because they get all obsessed and buried in the details. And as a result, Rossiu and his new government almost destroy everything. But again, its forgiveness is also on the other foot. And so thankfully, Simon's brotherly punch solves this issue. And of course, Rossiu becomes a better man for it. Obviously, real life is never as simple, but this is Gurren Lagann. Everything is simple or everything is presented as simple and straightforward, especially forgiveness. Even Lord Genome, the chief antagonist of the series' first half, evil bad guy incarnate, literal destroyer of humanity and jailer of humanity, he has a part to play in the final act where his redemption arc brings victory to the universe and opens the door to the future. His daughter, the discarded princess, Nia Teplin, she becomes the hope, the despair, and the hope again for Simon and humanity, as Simon's able to accomplish nearly everything that he does because he fights for a future with her. And of course, that makes the twist of her being an anti-spiral drone all the more tragic when, despite being from different dimensions and on opposing sides, their mutual love is what brings down the impossible of the anti-spiral and breaks open the door into the future where the spiral races across the universe can now responsibly direct their powers to avoid the supposed entropic end of the universe. And the drill is this perfect metaphor and literal device for always that consistent forward progress, ever accelerating. Simon's humble origins as a digger through the soil to the final conflict where, again, he's piercing reality itself, is the ultimate tier of ridiculous. Again, especially in the movies when the Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann mech isn't even the final form. Kamina's sacrifice and passing the torch as his presence remains with Team Daiguren. That also becomes literalized. And it's a moment that I feel is a great addition as far as the compilation movies are concerned. And it's not like Kamina was this perfect guy. He was built up as this hero figure to those around him. But we were repeatedly shown his vulnerability and doubts time and again, admitting as much to Yoko, when they were sitting under the stars, that he can only keep going because of his unwavering faith in Simon's abilities, at a time when all we've seen Simon do as an audience is cower and run away and only, really get into the fighting mood when Kamina, truly the back is against the wall. And it's really not until after Kamina's death, and of course a lot of help from Nia and others, that Simon breaks out of his own downward spiral of despair and takes charge. And it's also worth noting that every time Simon attempts to emulate his big brother directly, it blows up in his face, and Lagann, his mech by extension, rejects him. And it's only when all hope is lost and everyone else is giving up hope that they start to notice that Simon never stopped digging. And he's finding, in that process, he's finding his own answer to what it means to be strong and to take up that torch that Kamina gave him. And so again, by the first time skip, and we get to where he was at the beginning of the show and where he was at the end, this kid's gone from a complete 180, the scared, timid boy, to the confident but cool-headed leader of Daiguren, where Kamina was brash and straightforward and always charging ahead. Simon still keeps a cool head, but he still has the passion of Kamina and carries on Kamina's ideals of never giving up and always moving forward to a better tomorrow. And of course, I've been talking about all this serious stuff. I also love just how funny Gurren Lagann is. The ridiculous cutaway gags, the toilet humor, the Gainaxing boob jiggles, the fan service, the not-so-subtle penis jokes sprinkled in all the time, the perspective shots, all the times where the comedy is over the top for the acting or the comic strip animation. Just nobody has an inside voice. It's and again, just all the jokes and all the references, you're looking for hidden Mickeys in a Disney film. I consider, by this token, Gurren Lagann to be a comedy first, but we are unafraid, the show is unafraid to make its audience cry. My favorite quote at the end of the series, and something that sums up Simon perfectly and what I think makes him such a great character that exists in conversation and also, I guess, in opposition to, Noriko and Nadia and Shinji Ikari, where they all had their own different deals and they were the ones leading the charge into the future. Simon's quote at the end of the show was other people can follow through the tunnels that I dug. We have a character who has done so much to fight for the future, and he's a guy with the literal power of the universe in his hands. Simon essentially attains godhood, and he lets it go freely and willingly, and he steps out of the spotlight. And it's not just him, even Yoko Littner, who's been, again, the title badass lady of the series in all the different ways that she was always the take charge and, leader of the rebellion, to live a quiet life, give up her name entirely, and just become a humble school teacher because she recognized that the best way to nurture the next generation is to give them an education. The best tool we can do is give these kids an education that she never got at the time. And I think that's super cool. Also, time skip Yoko love her. She's amazing. And they still lean into she's still rocking it. and all the other Team Daiguren leaders all still have a massive crush on her, and she plays up to that for all of its worth. So I still, even at the most serious moments, there's still that brand of humor that is just distinctly Gurren Lagann and would become like distinctly Trigger. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and I hope you learned something neat about Gurren Lagann and a bit of the animation staff today. Let me know in your comments what your favorite memories from Gurren Lagann are, and or Imaishi and crew and Studio Trigger, or your favorite memories of Gainax now that they have been officially closed for almost a year now. So, and if you could, give the show a 5-star review if you enjoyed your time here. Of course, tell your friends. And so once more, thank you again for listening. This has been the Anime Field Guide. And until the next one, stay safe and watch more cartoons.